or these great kings or patriarchs to have more than one wife. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 17. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 17, and we're going to read from 14 through 20. That's Deuteronomy chapter 17, and we're going to be reading from verses 14 through 20. Let me start at verse 14. Here's what it says. When you come to the land which the Lord your God has given you, and possess it, and dwell in it, and say, I'll set a king over me like the nation that are around me. Verse 15 says, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chose, one from among your brethren. You shall set a king over you. You may not set a foreigner over you, who's not your brother. Verse 16, you shall not multiply horses for yourself or himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, for the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way. Now, you know what verse 16 is saying? When you see the word in the Old Testament, you got to understand something here, that the word horses signifies to a king tanks today. So in other words, don't build up a great army, because if you build up a great army, then what's going to happen is you won't need God, and you're going to think that you're winning battles by yourself. So God's instruction for them was not to build up or multiply horses, because God wanted total dependency on him. Here it comes. In verse 17, so in Deuteronomy 17:17, here's how you know that polygamy was not of God. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly multiply silver or gold for himself. In other words, the first part of Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 17, it says, neither shall he multiply wives for himself, and lest his heart turn away. Now, you got to look at this now. What happened in this, in the book, in the Bible, every single man, every single great man of God who end up with multiple wives, end up creating situations for themselves that did not please God. And so what God wanted them to do was, number one, when they get into Canaan, don't multiply wives for themselves, because why? Lest his heart turn away, nor shall he multiply great silver and gold for himself. Now, isn't it amazing what God was saying here? God wanted his people, number one, not to have many wives or multiple wives. The other thing is, God did not want his people to have great multiple of silver or multiply silver and gold. Why? Because if you do, you're going to be standoffish. Isn't that amazing? That's what's going on today. When people think that they have great riches, they look down on others. And that's exactly what God did not want with his kings. Now that you know where it says in the Bible that they should not have many wives. Now let's dig into it. Verse 18 says, also it shall be where, now you know what, let me just not read this. Let me just cut to more, because I don't know if I have time for all of this. It's funny, but the thing about it is God knew, he knew for a fact that if we got ourselves involved in this situation, and let me just park here for a minute, because I got to be honest with you. There was a time in my life when I said to my friends, and they're probably out there watching me, I used to say to my friend, man, it would be nice, man, to have, multiple wives, be like David and those guys, be like Solomon and all those guys. But the more I studied, the more I realized the headache and what happened to those guys. I realized that it was not a life of luxury. It was a life of pain. Excuse me. So you see, the thing about it is, when God said, what God said in Genesis about a man leaving his mother and his father and cleaving to his wife is a legitimate statement. Because the thing about it is, every single king that did not carry out what thus says the Lord end up in problems. Now, let's read this. David fell into adultery. Now, this is the bottom of the outline that's on the internet. David fell into adultery with Bathsheba and eventually committed murder in order to marry her. Isn't that amazing? Now, if you remember the story of David, he even with his multiple wife situation, by what he did, the sword never left his house, never left his house. And so because of that, because the prophet told him that, normally, because of the sin that David committed, in the Leviticus law, he could have been killed. But God spared him because the bloodline of Jesus was coming through him. And so you see, my brothers and sisters, all these great men of God messed up. But God, well, I don't want to get there yet. So let me just read this again. David fell into adultery with Bathsheba and eventually committed murder in order to marry her. That was the customary punishment of sin. But instead of taking David's life, God decreed that the child of David and Bathsheba should die, and strife should rise up against David and his own household. Now, let's take a look at Solomon, because this is another story. When I did Lust, Sex, and Marriage, it blew my mind about Solomon. Here you had a great man of God, a great king, and you'd think that Solomon would learn from what his father went through. But let's take a look at Solomon and his pagan wives. Let's take a look at it.